Imagine standing in complete darkness. The air is cool against your skin, thick with the scent of ancient stone and earth that has not seen sunlight in millennia. Your footsteps echo in ways that seem impossible, each sound multiplying, layering, creating harmonics that weren't there before. You're inside a temple carved from living rock, thousands of years old, and as you speak, the walls answer back, not with echoes, but with resonance, with frequency, with intention. This is not imagination. This is archaeology meeting acoustics. This is the moment when science remembers what the ancients never forgot. Across the world, hidden in the forgotten chambers of pyramids, beneath the domes of megalithic structures, within the carved sanctuaries of vanished civilizations, lies a technology so sophisticated that modern engineers are only now beginning to understand it. Not a technology of circuits and wires, but one of sound, frequency, and vibrational mathematics. The ancient builders, from the architects of the Egyptian temples to the engineers of Göbekli Tepe, from the craftsmen of Chavín de Huántar to the visionaries who erected Newgrange, they understood something fundamental about the universe that we have only recently rediscovered. That reality itself is vibration, and that sound can be sculpted as surely as stone. For centuries we have walked through these spaces as tourists, photographing their grandeur, measuring their dimensions, cataloguing their artifacts. We have asked, how did they build these structures with such primitive tools? How did they move stones weighing hundreds of tons across impossible distances? But we have failed to ask perhaps the most important question of all. Why did they build them this way? Why these specific dimensions? Why these precise angles? Why these particular materials arranged in patterns that seem to defy mere aesthetic choice? The answer, hidden in plain sight for millennia, is sound. These were not simply places of worship. They were not merely architectural achievements meant to inspire awe through visual grandeur alone. They were sonic instruments, carefully calibrated, mathematically precise, acoustically engineered spaces designed to produce specific frequencies, to amplify particular resonances, to create experiences that transcended the merely physical and entered the realm of the neurological, the psychological, the spiritual. They were, in the truest sense, machines built from stone, activated by human voice and percussion, powered by an understanding of harmonic principles that modern physics is only beginning to validate. Tonight, we embark on a journey through time and frequency. We will walk the paths of ancient engineers who understood that the universe speaks in vibration, that consciousness responds to resonance, and that the boundary between matter and energy, between the physical and the spiritual, exists at a frequency we are only now learning to measure. We will explore temples in Egypt where the voice of a priest could induce trance states in hundreds of worshippers simultaneously. We will descend into underground chambers in Malta, where infrasound, frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, were deliberately generated to alter brain activity. We will stand in the plazas of pre-Columbian America, where acoustic architects created sound mirrors that could carry a whisper across impossible distances. This is not mysticism. This is not pseudo-archaeology. This is the convergence of disciplines: archaeoacoustics, archaeometry, neuroscience, and ancient history, revealing a truth that changes everything we thought we knew about the sophistication of prehistoric civilizations. The temples were tuned. The pyramids were designed to resonate at specific frequencies. The megalithic chambers were built to amplify certain sounds while filtering others. Every column, every wall, every carved niche served an acoustic purpose as precise as any organ pipe in a cathedral, as calculated as any concert hall built today. And here is what makes this revelation so profound. They did this without computers, without sound meters, without oscilloscopes or frequency analyzers. They did it with observation, with experimentation, with a deep understanding of natural law passed down through generations of initiates who learned to hear what modern civilization has trained us to ignore. The subtle vibrations that connect all things, the frequencies that bridge the gap between the material world and consciousness itself. We stand at a threshold moment in human understanding. As our technology finally becomes sophisticated enough to measure what the ancients built, we are confronted with an uncomfortable truth, that in certain domains of knowledge, we have not progressed beyond our ancestors. We have regressed. We have lost languages of sound and frequency that were once common knowledge among temple architects and sacred engineers. We have forgotten how to build spaces that heal through resonance, that induce altered states through acoustic design, that create community through shared vibrational experience. But the structures remain, silent teachers carved in stone, waiting for us to rediscover the questions they were built to answer. What you're about to hear will challenge the comfortable narrative of human progress, the idea that we have climbed a steady ladder from primitive to advanced, from ignorant to enlightened. Instead, you will encounter evidence of a different kind of sophistication, one not measured in microprocessors and satellites, but in the ability to work in harmony with fundamental forces of nature, to create with intention that spans not just space, but consciousness itself. The sound-based architecture of ancient temples is not merely a curiosity of archaeological research. It is a portal into understanding how different ancient peoples across continents and millennia independently discovered the same truth, that sound shapes reality, that frequency affects consciousness, and that spaces can be designed to resonate with the very essence of what makes us human. So prepare to hear with new ears. To see ancient stones not as dead monuments to forgotten gods, but as living instruments waiting to be played once more. To understand that when you stand in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, or beneath the dome of the Hypogeum, or in the plaza at Chavín, you are standing inside a technology, a sacred science that united empirical knowledge with spiritual insight in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The ancients knew something we forgot. The walls remember what we lost. And now, finally, we are learning to listen. Long before the first written language, before the wheel, before agriculture transformed nomadic hunters into settled communities, our ancestors gathered in caves and painted the walls. But they did not paint everywhere. They chose specific locations within the cave systems, locations that seem random until you clap your hands, strike a stone, or sing. Then the walls come alive. The sound amplifies, resonates, creates overtones that seem to emanate from the rock itself. And almost without exception, the most spectacular cave paintings, the ones that demonstrate the higher skill, the most sacred subjects, are located at precisely these acoustic hotspots. This was humanity's first architecture of sound, executed not in stone temples built by civilizations, but in the natural cathedrals of the earth itself, selected by the ear as much as the eye. Research conducted in the caves of Lascaux, Altamira, and dozens of other Paleolithic sites across Europe has revealed a stunning correlation. The placement of paintings directly corresponds to locations of unusual acoustic properties. Where sound reverberates most powerfully, where natural echo chambers exist, where specific frequencies are amplified by the geology, there you find the most elaborate art. It is as if our ancestors 20,000 years ago were creating multimedia experiences, synchronizing visual imagery with sonic environments, understanding instinctively what modern neuroscience has confirmed, that sound and image together create far more powerful experiences than either alone. The archaeologist Igor Reznikov spent years conducting acoustic surveys of painted caves, and his findings revolutionized our understanding of Paleolithic consciousness. He demonstrated that the caves were not merely shelters decorated with art. They were carefully selected sonic environments where shamans or spiritual leaders could use the natural acoustics to create ceremonies that combined rhythmic percussion, chanting, and the flickering of firelight against painted walls. The caves resonated at frequencies that modern research has shown can induce trance states, that can synchronize brainwaves among groups of people, that can create what anthropologists call comunitas, a powerful sense of collective consciousness. This is where it begins. Not with the grand temples of Egypt or the megalithic chambers of Europe, but with the recognition that certain spaces possess sonic properties that affect human consciousness, and that our ancestors deliberately sought out and utilized these properties for ritual and transformation. As hunter-gatherers became agriculturalists, as the first permanent settlements arose in places like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, this acoustic wisdom moved from natural caves to constructed spaces. Göbekli Tepe, dated to approximately 9600 BCE, predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000. It should not exist according to conventional timelines of human development. Yet there it stands, or rather, there it was deliberately buried after centuries of use, a massive circular complex of carved stone pillars arranged in patterns that archaeologists initially assumed were purely ceremonial. But when acoustic researchers examined the site, they discovered something extraordinary. The pillars and walls were positioned to create specific acoustic effects. Sound would have bounced between the carved stones in ways that amplified certain frequencies while dampening others. The circular arrangement created what acousticians call a resonance chamber, a space where sound waves interact with the architecture to produce effects far beyond what would occur in an open environment. Dr. Ehsan Vahidi and his team conducted detailed acoustic modelling of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures and found that the structures would have created resonance at frequencies between 90 and 120 Hz, precisely in the range that modern research has associated with altered states of consciousness, with stimulation of the prefrontal cortex, with what subjects describe as feelings of presence or spirituality. Think about what this means. 12,000 years ago, before writing, before the wheel, before any of the technologies we associate with advanced civilization, human beings were constructing spaces specifically engineered to manipulate sound in ways that would affect consciousness. This was not accidental. The acoustic properties required intentional design, careful placement, empirical testing, and the transmission of specialized knowledge. As millennia passed and civilizations arose in the river valleys of the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus and the Yellow River, this acoustic knowledge evolved from the creation of resonance chambers to the engineering of complete sonic environments. The temples were no longer just spaces that happened to have interesting acoustics. They were instruments designed from foundation to capstone to produce specific sonic effects for specific purposes. In ancient Egypt, the tradition of temple building reached unprecedented sophistication. The temples at Karnak, Luxor, Dendera, and dozens of other sites were not merely architectural marvels. They were acoustic engines, each component carefully designed to shape sound in precise ways. Consider the Hypostyle halls, those vast forests of massive columns that characterize so many Egyptian temples. Modern tourists walk through them marveling at their scale, photographing the hieroglyphs that cover every surface. But they miss the acoustic purpose. Those columns are not just structural supports, they are acoustic baffles, precisely positioned to create specific patterns of sound reflection and absorption. In the Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak, with its 134 columns arranged in 16 rows, the acoustic environment is entirely artificial, deliberately constructed to create a sonic experience unlike anything in nature. Experiments conducted by acoustic engineers in these spaces have revealed that the halls were designed to amplify the human voice at certain frequencies while dampening others. A priest chanting in specific tones would find his voice amplified and enriched by the space itself, seeming to emanate not from his body, but from the walls, the columns, the air itself. This was not accident. The dimensions of the halls, the spacing of the columns, the materials used in construction, all worked together to create this effect. And the Egyptians went further. They understood that different materials resonate at different frequencies. The limestone, granite, sandstone, and basalt used in temple construction were not chosen merely for their durability or availability. Each stone type has different acoustic properties. Granite, for instance, rings like a bell when struck, sustaining its tone far longer than limestone. In many temples, granite was specifically used in areas where sound was meant to resonate and sustain, while limestone was used where sound needed to be absorbed quickly. The sacred geometry that governs Egyptian temple design, the proportions that seem to recur across different sites and different dynasties, is not just aesthetic or symbolic. It is acoustic. The same mathematical ratios that produce harmonious sound in music produce harmonious spaces in architecture. The ancient builders knew this. They built temples that were, in essence, giant musical instruments designed to be played by the human voice and by sacred percussion. But Egypt was not alone in this discovery. Across the world, in cultures that had no contact with each other, the same principles were being applied, the same acoustic technologies being developed. On the island of Malta, 5,000 years ago, unknown builders excavated the Hypogeum of Hal Safliani, a vast underground complex of chambers carved from solid limestone, descending 3 levels into the earth. The official archaeology tells us it was a necropolis, a temple, perhaps both. But modern acoustic analysis reveals something far more specific and intentional about its design. In one particular chamber, known as the Oracle Room, the walls and ceiling have been shaped to create one of the most remarkable acoustic effects ever documented in an ancient structure. When a male voice speaks or chants in the frequency range of 95 to 120 Hz, the entire chamber resonates powerfully. The sound seems to emanate not from the speaker, but from the walls themselves. And more remarkably, research has shown that sounds at these frequencies, when experienced in this space, create vibrations that can be measured as affecting human brain activity, potentially inducing altered states of consciousness. Dr. Paolo De Bertolis, who has conducted extensive research at the Hypogeum, describes the experience. When you generate sound at these frequencies in the Oracle Room, you don't just hear it. You feel it in your bones, in your chest, in your skull. It's like the entire space becomes a resonating chamber and you are inside the instrument. Modern brain imaging has shown that exposure to these low-frequency sounds can affect the prefrontal cortex and the language centers of the brain in ways that could induce trance states, enhance suggestibility, or create what ancient peoples might have interpreted as direct communication with the divine. The builders of the Hypogeum 5,000 years ago knew this. They excavated thousands of tons of rock. They carved and shaped the chambers with tools we can barely imagine, all to create a space that would produce these specific acoustic effects. This required not just knowledge, but experimentation, testing, refinement across generations. This was science, empirical and intentional. Meanwhile, in the British Isles, the builders of Newgrange were creating their own acoustic marvel. Constructed around 3200 BCE, older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, Newgrange is famous for its alignment with the winter solstice sunrise. But its acoustic properties are equally remarkable and far less known. The long stone passage that leads to the central chamber acts as an acoustic filter. Sound that enters from outside is dampened and distorted, but sound generated inside the chamber is amplified and enriched. The corbelled ceiling, those stacked stones that create the dome above the chamber, was constructed in a way that creates powerful resonance at certain frequencies. Acoustic studies conducted at Newgrange have documented something extraordinary. The chamber resonates strongly at approximately 110 Hz, the same frequency range that has been found to produce altered states of consciousness in modern research subjects. When drummers play within the chamber at specific rhythms, the space itself seems to pulse with energy, the walls vibrating in sympathy, creating a sonic experience that would have been overwhelming for ancient participants in whatever ceremonies took place there. Professor Aaron Watson, who has studied the acoustics of numerous Neolithic monuments, describes the experience. In these spaces, sound takes on a physical presence. It's not just something you hear. It surrounds you, penetrates you, becomes part of the experience of being in the space. For ancient peoples, this would have been indistinguishable from the presence of the divine. Across the Atlantic, in the Andes Mountains of Peru, the civilization at Chavín de Huántar was creating its own acoustic architecture around 1200 BCE. The site features an extensive network of underground galleries and passages, carved from stone, deliberately constructed to create specific acoustic effects that would have supported the religious and ceremonial functions of the site. The Chavín builders understood acoustic reflection, amplification, and the properties of sound in confined spaces. They created what archaeologists call sound galleries, passages specifically designed to carry sound from one part of the complex to another, allowing priests to speak from hidden locations and have their voices appear to emanate from sacred spaces where no one stood. They created acoustic tricks that would have seemed like magic to participants, voices of the gods speaking from the stone itself. Dr. John Rick of Stanford University, who has conducted extensive excavations at Chavín, used modern acoustic modelling to reconstruct how sound would have moved through the complex. His findings reveal a sophisticated understanding of acoustic principles. The ancient builders at Chavín were deliberately manipulating sound to create theatrical, mysterious, and powerful experiences. They understood that controlling sound meant controlling the perception of reality within their ceremonial spaces. What emerges from all of this, from the painted caves of Europe to the temples of Egypt, from the underground chambers of Malta to the megalithic monuments of Britain, from the mountain sanctuaries of Peru to the earliest constructions in Turkey, is a pattern that transcends individual cultures and civilizations. A universal recognition that sound is not merely a phenomenon to be experienced, but a force to be harnessed, shaped, and utilized for specific purposes. The ancient builders were acoustic engineers. They were composers who worked not in notes and melodies, but in spaces and frequencies. They understood what modern physics confirms, that sound is vibration, that vibration is energy, and that energy affects matter, including the matter of human consciousness itself. They built temples not just to honor gods, but to create experiences, to induce trance states that would facilitate communication with the divine, to synchronize the consciousness of communities through shared vibrational experience, to heal, to transform, to awaken something in the human spirit that responds to frequency in ways we are only beginning to understand. And they did all of this without electronic instruments, without computer modeling, without the scientific apparatus we consider essential to acoustic engineering. They did it with observation, experimentation, and a kind of knowledge that was simultaneously empirical and intuitive. A knowledge that saw no separation between the physical properties of sound and its spiritual effects. This was the origin, the recognition that certain spaces, certain sounds, certain frequencies have power. Not symbolic power, not merely psychological power, but measurable, reproducible, physiological power to affect consciousness, to alter perception, to bridge the gap between the material and the transcendent. The question that haunts modern researchers is simple yet profound. How did they know? How did cultures separated by oceans and millennia independently discover the same acoustic frequencies, the same architectural principles, the same relationship between sound and consciousness? The answer, as we shall see, lies not in coincidence, but in something far more interesting, in the fundamental nature of sound itself, and in the forgotten sciences that ancient initiates studied for lifetimes to master. For thousands of years the knowledge persisted. The temples stood as living proof of ancient acoustic science, their stones still resonating with the frequencies for which they were designed. Priests and initiates continued the traditions, passed down the secrets of how to activate these sonic instruments, how to use voice and percussion to awaken the spaces and through them, to awaken consciousness itself. But knowledge, especially secret knowledge, is fragile. It exists not in books or buildings, but in the minds of those who understand it, in the traditions of practice and transmission. And when those traditions are interrupted by conquest, by religious persecution, by the simple passage of time and the inevitable death of masters who leave no successors, the knowledge vanishes. This is what happened. Gradually, then suddenly, the understanding of acoustic temple architecture was lost. The temples remained, but they became silent. Not because they could no longer resonate, the physics of their construction remained unchanged, but because the people who knew how to use them, who understood the specific chants and rhythms and placements that would activate their acoustic properties, disappeared from history. In Egypt, the ancient traditions were first suppressed by foreign rulers and later buried by the rise of new religions. The Greek Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt after Alexander's conquest, had no interest in preserving the acoustic mysteries of the old priesthood. The Romans, who came later, saw the temples as curiosities of a conquered people, valuable for their stone and their symbolic association with antiquity, but no longer as living centers of practice. When Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, the last remnants of the old temple practices were actively suppressed. The priests were dispersed or converted. The temples were repurposed, defaced, or abandoned, and with them went the knowledge of their acoustic secrets. The spaces that had once resonated with specific frequencies, that had been tuned like instruments to produce precise effects on consciousness, fell silent. In Malta, the Hypogeum was eventually sealed and forgotten, buried under later constructions, lost to memory until it was accidentally rediscovered in 1902 during construction work. For thousands of years, its remarkable acoustic properties affected no one, known to no one, a technology orphaned from its creators. In Britain, the megalithic monuments like Newgrange and Stonehenge continued to dominate the landscape, too massive to be destroyed, too impressive to be completely ignored, but their purpose was forgotten. Medieval chroniclers invented fantastic stories about giants and wizards building these structures, explanations that said more about the poverty of contemporary understanding than about the sophistication of the builders. The acoustic properties of these monuments, properties that required sophisticated engineering to create, were unnoticed because no one thought to listen. No one remembered that these spaces had once been instruments. By the Middle Ages in Europe, the acoustic knowledge of antiquity was entirely lost. When the great cathedrals were built, Notre Dame, Chartres, Canterbury, their builders reinvented acoustic architecture from first principles, learning through trial and error how to create spaces where sound could enhance religious experience. They succeeded magnificently, but they did so without awareness that they were rediscovering principles that had been applied thousands of years earlier. The cathedrals had magnificent acoustics, but they were designed primarily for the medieval understanding of sacred music, plainchant and polyphony, not for the specific frequency-based effects that ancient temple architects had mastered. The Islamic world preserved more of the ancient knowledge, at least indirectly. The mathematical principles that governed acoustic design, the ratios and proportions that create harmonious spaces, were studied intensely by Islamic scholars who saw mathematics as a way of understanding divine order. The mosques they built often incorporated sophisticated acoustic design, including systems for amplifying the voice of the imam and creating spaces of profound sonic beauty. But even here, the specific knowledge of how ancient temples had been designed to induce altered states through infrasound and targeted frequencies was lost. In the Americas, the conquest was even more brutal and complete. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Mexico and Peru, they systematically destroyed temples, shattered monuments, and suppressed indigenous religious practices. The acoustic knowledge of civilizations like the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca was not just forgotten, it was deliberately erased. The temples that remained were stripped of their sacred function, and without that function, without the chants and ceremonies that had activated their acoustic properties, they became mere ruins, their sonic capabilities dormant and unknown. For centuries, the acoustic architecture of ancient temples existed in a state of limbo, physically present but functionally invisible. Archaeologists measured the structures, documented their dimensions, theorized about their religious significance, but entirely missed the acoustic dimension of their design. This was not stupidity or carelessness, it was a consequence of how archaeology had developed as a discipline. Early archaeologists were primarily interested in objects, artifacts, statues, inscriptions, things that could be collected, catalogued, and displayed. They studied temples as visual and symbolic spaces, not as sonic environments. Even when acoustics began to be recognized as important in certain contexts, it was limited to obvious cases. Greek and Roman theatres, for instance, where it was clear that acoustic design mattered because these were spaces explicitly designed for performance. But temples? The assumption was that acoustics in temples was at best a happy accident, at worst irrelevant to their primary function. This blindness persisted well into the 20th century. Respected archaeologists could spend entire careers studying Egyptian temples, could measure every dimension and document every hieroglyph, and never once consider that the spacing of columns might have an acoustic purpose, that the choice of stone might be related to its resonant properties, that the entire structure might be, in essence, a musical instrument. The few voices that suggested otherwise were marginalized. When researchers in the early 20th century began to notice acoustic anomalies in ancient structures, sounds that behaved in unusual ways, spaces that seemed designed to resonate at specific frequencies, their findings were dismissed as curiosities, as subjective impressions rather than objective data. The Academy was not ready to consider that ancient peoples might have possessed sophisticated acoustic knowledge. Part of this resistance was intellectual conservatism, the difficulty any field has in abandoning established paradigms. But part of it was also a deeper bias, a form of civilizational arrogance that assumed ancient peoples were primitive, that they built impressive structures through brute labor and trial and error, but not through sophisticated understanding of engineering principles. The idea that Neolithic builders working with stone tools could have understood acoustic principles that require advanced mathematics to express was, for many archaeologists, simply implausible. This attitude began to change only in the late 20th century, driven by developments in multiple fields that converged to create a new way of looking at ancient architecture. The first catalyst was the development of acoustic measurement technology, sophisticated enough to document subtle sonic effects in situ. Portable sound level meters, frequency analyzers, and eventually computer-based acoustic modeling software allowed researchers to quantify what previous generations could only experience subjectively. When these tools were brought to ancient temples and monuments, the results were undeniable. These spaces did have unusual acoustic properties. The effects were measurable, reproducible, and far too consistent across different structures to be coincidental. The second catalyst was neuroscience. Research into how different sound frequencies affect the human brain provided a scientific framework for understanding why ancient builders might have deliberately created spaces with specific acoustic properties. Studies showing that certain low frequencies could induce altered states of consciousness, that rhythmic sounds could synchronize brain waves across groups of people, that spatial acoustics could affect perception and emotion. All of this gave credibility to the idea that ancient acoustic architecture was intentional and purposeful. The third catalyst was the willingness of a new generation of researchers to ask different questions. Instead of just asking, "What did this structure look like?" or "What was carved on its walls?" they began asking, "What would it have sounded like?" and "How would sonic experiences in this space have affected people?" This is how the field of archaeoacoustics was born, at the intersection of archaeology, acoustics, neuroscience, and musicology. And as researchers began systematically studying ancient structures from an acoustic perspective, a revolution in understanding began. At the Great Pyramid of Giza, acoustic researchers documented something that Egyptologists had known but never explained. The King's Chamber resonates powerfully at a frequency of approximately 110 Hz. Tests using sound recording equipment showed that when this frequency is generated in the chamber, either by voice or by instruments, the space amplifies it dramatically, creating a resonance that subjects describe as overwhelming, even transcendent. The pyramid is not just a tomb, it is an acoustic device. The same frequency, 110 Hz, keeps appearing. In the oracle room of the Hypogeum in Malta, in the chamber at Newgrange, in numerous other ancient structures across different continents and different millennia. This cannot be coincidence. This is evidence of shared knowledge, of understanding that this particular frequency has specific effects on human consciousness. Modern research has confirmed what ancient builders apparently knew. Exposure to 110 Hz affects activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with language, decision-making, and self-awareness. Subjects exposed to this frequency often report feelings of transcendence, timelessness, presence, experiences that across cultures and centuries have been associated with spiritual or mystical states. The ancient architects built spaces specifically designed to generate and amplify this frequency. They did so without oscilloscopes or neuroimaging technology. They discovered it through observation and experiment, and they built it into their most sacred structures with precision that continues to impress modern acoustic engineers. But the discoveries went deeper still. Researchers began to understand that the acoustic properties of ancient temples were not limited to resonance at specific frequencies. The buildings incorporated sophisticated acoustic design that controlled sound in multiple ways simultaneously. At Karnak, acoustic modelling revealed that the Hypostyle hall functions as an acoustic filter, dampening external noise while amplifying internal sound at specific frequencies. The result is that ceremonies conducted within the hall would have been isolated from the outside world acoustically, a sonic boundary that reinforced the psychological boundary between the sacred space and the mundane world beyond. At Stonehenge, experiments demonstrated that the original configuration of stones, before centuries of collapse and removal, would have created a powerful echo chamber, reflecting sound back toward the center while excluding external noise. Recent research using acoustic reflectors positioned where the missing stones once stood showed that sounds generated inside the circle would have been amplified and prolonged, creating an immersive sonic environment entirely different from the open plain surrounding the monument. The Mayan pyramid at Chichen Itza provides one of the most spectacular examples of acoustic design. When you stand at the base of the pyramid and clap your hands, the echo that returns from the staircase sounds remarkably like the chirp of the Quetzal bird, sacred in Mayan cosmology. Acoustic analysis has confirmed this is not coincidence. The dimensions and angles of the steps are precisely what would be necessary to transform a hand clap into a sound that mimics the Quetzal's call. The pyramid was designed to produce this acoustic effect, to transform human sound into the voice of the sacred bird. As these discoveries accumulated, a picture emerged of ancient acoustic architecture far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The temples and monuments were not just buildings. They were environments carefully engineered to produce specific acoustic effects, to shape sound in ways that would affect the consciousness of those within them, to create experiences of the sacred through manipulation of frequency and resonance. But this revelation raised profound questions and uncomfortable challenges to established archaeology. If ancient peoples possessed this level of acoustic knowledge, what else did they know that we have assumed they didn't? If Neolithic builders working with stone tools could engineer spaces with acoustic properties that modern architects with computer-aided design would struggle to replicate, what does that say about our assumptions of linear progress, of primitive ancients gradually evolving toward enlightened moderns? The resistance from mainstream archaeology has been significant. Many established scholars remain skeptical of archaeoacoustic findings, arguing that the acoustic properties of ancient structures are side effects of other design considerations, not intentional features. They point out that without written records explicitly describing acoustic design principles, we cannot be certain of the builder's intentions. This skepticism is not entirely without merit. The danger of reading too much into ancient structures is real. The history of archaeology is littered with theories that projected modern preoccupations onto ancient artifacts. But the preponderance of evidence for intentional acoustic design has become difficult to dismiss. The consistency of specific frequencies across different structures, the precision required to create the documented acoustic effects, the correlation between acoustic hotspots and areas of ritual significance. All of this points toward intentionality. Moreover, some written evidence does exist, though it has been hiding in plain sight, dismissed or misinterpreted by scholars who didn't understand its acoustic implications. Ancient Egyptian texts refer to opening the mouth ceremonies that involve specific sounds and chants in temple spaces. Greek writers described Orphic mysteries involving music and sound in underground chambers. Hindu and Buddhist texts are explicit about the use of specific sounds, mantras, in sacred spaces, sounds believed to have power not just as symbols, but as vibrations that affect reality itself. What these texts describe is not merely music or prayer. They describe acoustic technologies, the deliberate use of sound in specifically designed spaces to produce specific effects. The ancient writers may not have used the term acoustic engineering, but they were describing the same phenomenon that modern archaeoacoustics is now documenting. The conflict is not just academic. It touches something deeper, our civilization's relationship with ancient knowledge, our willingness to acknowledge that sophistication can take forms different from our own, that mastery of vibration and frequency might be as valuable as mastery of electricity and computation. There is also resistance from those who fear that acknowledging ancient acoustic sophistication opens the door to pseudoscience, to claims of lost civilizations with crystal-powered technologies and acoustic levitation. This fear is understandable. The study of ancient mysteries has indeed attracted its share of unfounded speculation. But the solution is not to dismiss legitimate acoustic research. It is to insist on rigorous methodology, on reproducible measurements, on explanations grounded in physics and neuroscience. The tragedy is that while scholars debate the interpretation of evidence, the knowledge itself remains largely lost. We can now measure what the ancient temples do acoustically, but we cannot fully reconstruct how they were meant to be used. We know that certain frequencies were amplified, but we don't know the specific chants or instruments that were meant to generate those frequencies. We know the spaces were designed as acoustic instruments, but we don't have the complete score for how they were meant to be played. Some knowledge may be irrecoverable. The traditions were oral, passed from master to student over lifetimes of initiation and practice. When those lineages were broken, when the last priests who remembered the proper chants died without successors, that knowledge vanished as completely as if it had never existed. But some knowledge can be reconstructed through careful acoustic analysis, through understanding of what effects different frequencies produce, through experimentation with reproduction of ancient conditions. Researchers are beginning to piece together how these sonic instruments may have been used. It is detective work of the most challenging kind, trying to understand a technology that left no blueprints, no instruction manuals, no surviving practitioners. But it is work that matters, because what is at stake is not merely archaeological understanding, but the recovery of wisdom about the relationship between sound, space, and consciousness. Wisdom that might be valuable not just as historical curiosity, but as practical knowledge for the present and future. The ancient acoustic architects knew something we have forgotten, that the spaces we inhabit shape us, not just visually and symbolically, but sonically, vibrationally, at levels that affect our neurology directly. They built spaces that heal, that transform, that elevate consciousness through careful manipulation of frequency and resonance. We have lost this knowledge, but the buildings remain, silent teachers waiting for us to learn how to listen again. Science is rediscovering what the ancients knew. But this rediscovery is not merely archaeological. It is also practical, immediate, and potentially transformative for our own time. In the past 3 decades, as archaeoacoustics has matured as a discipline, researchers have moved beyond simply documenting the acoustic properties of ancient structures. They have begun to understand why these properties matter, how they affect human consciousness and physiology, and what applications this knowledge might have for modern architecture and healing. The breakthrough came from neuroscience. In the 1990s and early 2000s, researchers began systematically studying how different sound frequencies affect brain activity. Using technologies like EEG and later fMRI, they could observe in real time how exposure to specific sounds changed the patterns of electrical activity in the brain. One of the most significant findings was the discovery of entrainment, the tendency of the brain to synchronize its electrical rhythms to external rhythmic stimuli. When subjects are exposed to rhythmic sounds at certain frequencies, their brain waves begin to match those frequencies. This is not metaphorical, it is measurable. The brain literally tunes itself to external sonic rhythms. This effect is most pronounced with low-frequency sounds, bass drums, deep chants, the kind of sounds that ancient temples were designed to amplify. At frequencies around 110 Hz, the frequency that keeps appearing in ancient acoustic architecture, the effect is particularly strong. Exposure to these sounds can shift brain activity from the beta waves associated with normal waking consciousness to alpha and theta waves associated with relaxation, meditation, and altered states. Dr. Ian Cook, studying the effects of these frequencies on the brain, found something remarkable. The prefrontal cortex, the newest part of the human brain in evolutionary terms, shows decreased activity when exposed to 110 Hz. Meanwhile, more ancient parts of the brain, including areas associated with emotion and intuition, show increased activity. It is as if the rational, language-based thinking of normal consciousness is temporarily deactivated, while deeper, more primal modes of awareness are awakened. This would explain the accounts across cultures of temple experiences that involve transcendence of normal thought, direct perception of truth without verbal mediation, communion with the divine. These were not merely psychological or symbolic experiences. They were neurological events triggered by acoustic phenomena deliberately engineered into sacred spaces. The implications are profound. The ancient architects were essentially creating technologies for altering consciousness, not through chemistry, not through meditation alone, but through sound. The temples were machines for inducing specific mental states that facilitated religious experience, healing, community bonding, and perhaps forms of perception and knowing that our civilization has largely lost access to. Modern researchers have begun experimenting with recreating these acoustic environments and their effects. At the University of Malta, scientists have built a scale model of the Hypogeum's oracle room and use it to study the effects of 110 Hz resonance on modern subjects. The results are consistent. People exposed to these sounds in a properly resonant space report feelings of altered consciousness, timelessness, and presence, the same qualities described in ancient texts about temple experiences. In England, archaeoacoustician Paul Devereux has conducted experiments playing ancient instruments, drums, rattles, bells, in Neolithic chambered tombs. He has documented that these structures amplify certain frequencies dramatically while dampening others, creating acoustic effects that would have been overwhelming for ancient participants in ritual activities. He has recorded these sounds and played them back to modern listeners, who consistently report that the experience is emotionally powerful, inducing feelings of awe, mystery, and connection to something larger than themselves. What becomes clear from this research is that ancient acoustic architecture was not primitive or superstitious. It was sophisticated applied neuroscience, developed through centuries of observation and experimentation, refined across generations of builders who understood that specific sonic environments produce specific states of consciousness. But the rediscovery goes beyond just understanding what the ancients did. It opens possibilities for applying this knowledge in contemporary contexts. Consider the modern epidemic of stress, anxiety, and disconnection. We live in environments, cities, offices, homes, designed primarily for visual aesthetics and functional efficiency, with little thought given to acoustic quality. The result is spaces that are sonically chaotic, filled with jarring frequencies and dissonant noise that keep our nervous systems in states of constant alertness and stress. What if we designed spaces using acoustic principles drawn from ancient temple architecture? Not to recreate ancient religious experiences, but to create environments that support human well-being through careful acoustic design. Some architects and designers are beginning to explore this. There are hospitals being built with acoustic design that incorporates principles of resonance and frequency to create spaces that facilitate healing. There are meditation centers being designed with acoustic properties similar to ancient temples, spaces that use sound to induce the states of consciousness that meditators work years to achieve through mental discipline alone. In Japan, the architect Tadao Ando has created spaces that use natural acoustics to enhance spiritual experience without any explicit religious purpose. His Church of Light uses sound reflection and resonance to create an acoustic environment that visitors describe as profound and moving, even those with no religious background. He has acknowledged learning from studies of ancient temples, understanding that sacred architecture is as much about sound as about sight. In the field of music therapy, practitioners are rediscovering what ancient healers knew, that specific sounds at specific frequencies can have therapeutic effects. Singing bowls, tuning forks, and other instruments that produce pure tones at frequencies like 110 Hz, 432 Hz, and others are being used to treat conditions from chronic pain to PTSD. The mechanisms are becoming clearer through research. These sounds affect brain chemistry, influence hormone levels, synchronize neural activity across different brain regions. This is not New Age mysticism. It is evidence-based medicine drawing on both cutting-edge neuroscience and ancient wisdom. The frequencies themselves are precisely measurable. The effects on the brain are documented through imaging technologies. The therapeutic outcomes are being validated through clinical trials. What makes this especially remarkable is that it represents a convergence between ancient acoustic knowledge and modern science. The frequencies that ancient architects designed their temples to produce are the same frequencies that modern neuroscience has identified as having specific effects on consciousness. The ancient builders didn't have EEG machines or fMRI scanners, but through patient observation and experimentation, they discovered the same truths that modern instruments now confirm. This should humble us. It should challenge our assumptions about the trajectory of human knowledge. We have not simply progressed from ignorance to enlightenment. We have lost knowledge and are now recovering it, rediscovering through scientific method what ancient initiates learned through other means. The question is, what else did they know that we have yet to rediscover? There are hints in the structures that remain. At the Great Pyramid, the acoustic properties of the Grand Gallery suggest it might have functioned as a resonator, amplifying sounds before they entered the king's chamber. Some researchers speculate it could have been used to create sound combinations, harmonics generated by multiple frequencies interacting, a kind of stone synthesizer capable of producing sonic effects far more complex than simple resonance at a single frequency. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the acoustic properties of the central towers have been documented but not fully explained. The space seems designed to amplify chanting at specific frequencies while creating complex echo patterns that some listeners describe as otherworldly. The Khmer builders clearly understood acoustic design, but the full sophistication of their knowledge remains mysterious. In the American Southwest, Chaco Canyon ceremonial kivas demonstrate acoustic properties that modern architects struggle to explain. The spaces amplify certain sounds while creating unusual reflections that seem to move sound around the chamber in ways that shouldn't be possible given the simple geometry of the structures. Some researchers suggest the builders understood principles of acoustic reflection that modern acoustics is only now beginning to formalize mathematically. Each of these examples suggests depths of knowledge we have not yet fully plumbed. The ancient acoustic architects left us structures that continue to reveal new secrets as our measurement capabilities become more sophisticated and our understanding of sound's effects on consciousness deepens. But beyond the technical knowledge, beyond the acoustic engineering, there is something more profound that the ancient builders understood, something that our civilization, for all its technological prowess, has largely forgotten. They understood that spaces shape consciousness, that the environments we inhabit are not neutral containers for our activities, but active forces that influence our thinking, feeling, and perceiving. That architecture is not merely functional or aesthetic, but fundamentally transformative, capable of elevating or degrading the human spirit through its effects on our sensory and neurological systems. They built sacred spaces not just to honor gods, but to create environments where transformation could happen, where individuals could experience states of consciousness different from, and potentially more expansive than ordinary awareness, where communities could synchronize their awareness through shared sonic experience, where healing of body and spirit could be facilitated through the power of resonance and frequency. This is what we have lost, not just technical knowledge of acoustic engineering, but the understanding that such knowledge matters, that creating spaces for transformation and transcendence is a worthy endeavor, that architecture can and should serve not just practical purposes, but spiritual ones. Modern architecture, for all its achievements, rarely even attempts this. We build structures that are efficient, functional, sometimes beautiful to look at, but we don't build structures that use sound to transform consciousness. We have forgotten that this is even possible. The rediscovery of ancient acoustic architecture challenges us to remember. It invites us to consider what our cities and buildings might be like if we design them not just for visual impact or structural efficiency, but for acoustic quality that supports human flourishing. What if our schools were designed with acoustic properties that facilitated learning and concentration? What if our hospitals incorporated spaces with acoustic characteristics that promoted healing? What if our homes included rooms specifically designed for meditation, for family connection, for the kinds of experiences that ancient temples facilitated? This is not nostalgia for a pre-modern past. It is recognition that ancient wisdom and modern technology can and should be combined. We have capabilities the ancients never dreamed of: computer modeling, advanced materials, precision measurement. Imagine what could be created if we applied these capabilities to building spaces with the acoustic sophistication of ancient temples, but enhanced by contemporary understanding and technology. Some visionaries are already working in this direction. The architect James Turrell has created spaces that manipulate light and sound to induce powerful perceptual and emotional experiences. The composer Pauline Oliveros developed a practice of deep listening that uses acoustic spaces and technology to facilitate states of expanded awareness. The acoustic engineer Tom Danley has designed sound systems that can reproduce the specific frequencies and resonances documented in ancient temples, allowing modern people to experience these acoustic effects without travelling to remote archaeological sites. These are beginnings, explorations of what becomes possible when we take seriously the idea that ancient acoustic architecture has something valuable to teach us. The ultimate triumph of archaeoacoustics is not just understanding what the ancients built, but applying that understanding to build better spaces, better environments, better conditions for human consciousness to flourish in our own time. The temples are teachers, the stones remember, and now, finally, we are learning to listen, not just to the past, but to the frequencies that connect past and future, ancient wisdom and modern science, the material world and the realm of consciousness. The sacred architecture of sound is being reborn, not as an archaeological curiosity, but as a living practice, a recovered wisdom that our world desperately needs. In an age of noise and distraction, of fragmented attention and stressed nervous systems, the ancient understanding that spaces can be designed to heal, to center, to awaken through their acoustic properties offers not just historical insight, but practical hope. We stand at a threshold. Behind us, millennia of lost knowledge slowly being recovered from silent stones. Ahead of us, possibilities for creating environments that support the fullest expression of human potential through the conscious application of acoustic principles. The frequency of the sacred has never been silent. We have simply forgotten how to hear it. But we are remembering. And in that remembering lies the potential for transformation, not just of our understanding of the past, but of our relationship to space, to sound, to consciousness itself. Stand now in imagination at the entrance to an ancient temple. Perhaps it is dawn at Karnak, the first light touching the forest of columns. Perhaps it is twilight at Newgrange, as the last rays of sun prepare to illuminate the winter chamber. Perhaps it is midnight in the Hypogeum, deep beneath the earth, where darkness and silence wait to be transformed by sound. You are not alone. Stretching back through time, countless others have stood where you stand now, about to enter spaces designed not just to shelter or impress, but to transform. Spaces where sound becomes something more than vibration in air, where frequency becomes the bridge between matter and consciousness, where architecture transcends stone and becomes instrument, technology, gateway. What we have explored together tonight is more than archaeological discovery. It is the recovery of a fundamental truth about human potential and the world we inhabit. The ancient builders understood something our civilization has largely forgotten: that reality is vibration, that consciousness responds to frequency, and that spaces can be designed to shape awareness as surely as they shape stone. They left us teachers carved from granite and limestone, excavated from living rock, raised from the earth in configurations that continue to resonate millennia after their creators turned to dust. These structures are not dead monuments. They are living technologies, waiting for us to rediscover how to activate them, how to use them, how to learn from them. The knowledge is not completely lost. It lives in the stones themselves, encoded in dimensions and proportions, in the mathematical relationships between walls and chambers, in the acoustic properties that measurement can document and analysis can decode. It lives in the frequencies that still resonate when the right sounds are made, in the effects on consciousness that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to explain. And it lives in us, in the part of human awareness that responds to these frequencies, that recognizes at some deep level that these spaces were made for transformation, that the ancients left us tools for awakening that transcend language and culture. We have walked through millennia tonight. From Paleolithic caves, where our ancestors first recognized that sound and space could be combined to create experiences beyond the ordinary, through the great temple complexes of Egypt and Malta and Britain and Peru, where acoustic architecture reached heights of sophistication that still challenge our understanding, to the present moment where science and ancient wisdom converge to reveal truths that both validate and transcend both. What emerges from this journey is not nostalgia for a lost golden age, but recognition of continuity, a thread of understanding about sound and consciousness that connects the deepest past to the immediate present and the unfolding future. The ancient acoustic architects were not primitive people stumbling on interesting effects. They were sophisticated engineers and experimentalists who developed through observation and practice a technology for consciousness transformation that our civilization is only now learning to appreciate. Their temples stand as reminders of what human beings can achieve when we work in harmony with fundamental principles of nature, when we combine empirical knowledge with intuitive understanding, when we create not just for utility or aesthetics, but for transformation and transcendence. The resonance that remains in these ancient stones is not merely acoustic. It is the resonance of human potential, of wisdom that spans ages, of knowledge that transcends the particular cultures that developed it, to touch something universal in the human experience. We are the heirs to this knowledge. We stand in a unique moment in history, possessing both the scientific tools to understand what the ancients built and enough distance from our own civilization's assumptions to recognize that sophistication takes many forms, that progress is not linear, that there are modes of knowing and building that our recent ancestors dismissed, but that we can now appreciate and learn from. The question is, what will we do with this recovered wisdom? Will we allow it to remain archaeological curiosity, interesting but irrelevant to our daily lives, filed away in academic journals and forgotten by the wider world? Or will we take seriously the invitation these ancient structures extend to rethink our relationship with sound, with space, with consciousness itself? The temples whisper a possibility that we could design our world differently, that we could create spaces that support human flourishing, not just functionally, but acoustically, neurologically, spiritually, that we could recover the ancient understanding that our environments shape us, and that we should therefore shape our environments with intention and wisdom. This is not a call to return to the past. It is a call to integrate the wisdom of the past with the capabilities of the present. To use our technology not just to measure and understand what the ancients achieved, but to create new acoustic spaces that serve the needs of contemporary life while honoring the principles that made ancient temples so effective at facilitating transformation and transcendence. The frequency of the sacred has never been silent. It resonates still in stones raised by hands-long dust, in chambers carved from living rock, in spaces designed to be played like instruments, to transform consciousness through vibration, to bridge the gap between the material and the transcendent. We need only learn to listen, to approach these ancient structures not as dead monuments, but as living teachers. To recognize that the knowledge they embody is not merely historical, but practical. Not merely interesting, but essential. Essential to recovering a wholeness of being that our civilization has traded for other achievements. The builders knew. The stones remember. The frequencies remain, waiting to be rediscovered, reactivated, reintegrated into human consciousness and culture. This is the triumph and the challenge, that we live at a moment when ancient wisdom and modern science can meet, when what was lost can be found, when the sonic technologies of the ancients can be understood, appreciated, and applied to create spaces and experiences that serve awakening and transformation in our own time. The temples still stand. The chambers still resonate. The frequencies that ancient priests used to induce altered states, to facilitate healing, to create community through shared vibrational experience. These frequencies can still be measured, can still be generated, can still produce their effects on consciousness. What was built in stone remains. What was lost in time is being recovered. What was forgotten is being remembered. And in that remembering lies a possibility more profound than mere archaeological understanding. The possibility that we might learn to build again as the ancients did, creating spaces that serve not just our practical needs, but our deepest longings for transformation, for transcendence, for experiences that remind us that we are more than our ordinary consciousness suggests, that reality is richer and stranger than our everyday awareness reveals. The sound-based architecture of ancient temples is not a mystery solved, but a mystery opened, an invitation to explore the relationship between sound and consciousness, between space and spirit, between the material world and the realms of awareness that acoustic engineering can facilitate access to. May we accept that invitation. May we learn from the silent teachers of stone and frequency. May we build spaces that resonate with the frequencies of awakening, that use sound as the ancients did, not as mere decoration or entertainment, but as technology for transformation. The temples await, the frequencies call. The ancient architects left us more than ruins. They left us blueprints for consciousness encoded in stone, acoustic principles that transcend time, wisdom that speaks in the language of vibration and resonance. Listen, the stones are singing. They have been singing for millennia, waiting for us to remember how to hear. This is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a rediscovery, a recovery, a renaissance of understanding that connects the deepest past to the most promising future. The lost blueprint has been found. Now we must learn to read it, to use it, to build with it again, creating spaces where sound shapes consciousness, where frequency facilitates awakening, where ancient wisdom and modern understanding combine to serve the transformation of human awareness. The resonance remains. It has always remained. We need only listen.